Look, I know I'm 6 months late to the Jodi Hildebrandt Ruby Franke nightmare, but I just started watching YouTube videos about it, and now it's all I can think about, so we must discuss. My perception is that there's been a tremendous amount of content covering the trial, the case in general, what happened to these kids, what these women actually did. And I think we're light on understanding the why, like conceptualizing these two women. And that's what I hope to do today. But I have to give the caveat that I cannot diagnose from afar. I have not met them. I'm just looking through, we're all just looking through a keyhole at these women and this family in general. But I still think it's valuable to sort of think about, like, how would you approach understanding a situation like this? Now, before we jump into this video, I want to thank our sponsor, BetterHelp. I wanted to partner with BetterHelp on this specific video because we're going to talk a lot about mental health and the importance of getting therapy that is ethical, that is accessible, and tailored to your specific needs. Over the last decade, BetterHelp has led the charge in making therapy more accessible. It used to be very difficult to find a therapist that had the expertise you needed. And if you found them, you had to travel to go work with them. And oftentimes they were exceptionally expensive. With BetterHelp, you can seek affordable and ethical treatment from the comfort of your own home. Using your computer or your phone, you can receive therapeutic support with phone calls, video calls, or even messaging. As a psychologist, I think it is so important that BetterHelp has made therapy so accessible. And as part of that accessibility, when you sign up to BetterHelp, you complete a survey. Usually within 48 hours, they will match you with a therapist that meets your specific needs and has the expertise that you're looking for. It really puts the power back in the hands of the client. I really recommend you try it out. Go to betterhelp.com/poppsych, or when you sign up, select PopPsych from the drop-down, and you'll receive a special discount on your first month. I want to start this by talking about parenting experts. Being a parent is exceptionally difficult, and the amount of ambiguity that comes with it is, I think, overwhelming for a lot of people. So it's normal. What we need as parents, we need to be anchored in a philosophy, in an approach that reduces our anxiety and it sort of gives us some direction. So I think parenting experts make sense. What bothers me is that these experts self-identify as being experts, and it's very difficult to see the outcomes of their parenting strategies. Even things that are as simple as to swat or not to swat, right? Very difficult to measure the actual outcome of that behavior. Yes, there is research saying that if you spank a kid, they'll be less happy after you spank them. But that doesn't tell us what the long-term outcome of that swatting behavior is, because it's very difficult to control the intensity of the swat, the frequency of the swat, the behaviors that led up to the swat, right? It's also very difficult to know what's the long-term outcome. Are we looking at financial success, social success, psychological stability, right? There's so many variables that we don't really know. We can philosophically go, hey, I'd rather not do that, or yes, you should do that, right? We don't know the implications of grounding kids. What's better, verbally yelling at your child or giving him a spanking? Is it better to, as Ruby Franke was doing, remove your kid from their bedroom for 7 months? What's the my point is this. I'm not weighing in on what good and bad parenting is, but I'm weighing in on is the arrogance that the parenting industry has. I wish people would put out a book like, I don't really know what I'm doing. This is my best guess, and here's why I think that. That would at least be honest. Versus what we have are people that publish books and they're like, I know exactly how to parent and here's why. And if you look at any of the research tied to any parental modality, it's deeply flawed. With that being said, let's talk about Ruby Franke. There is a shocking lack of data online about her childhood. By looking at YouTube videos and Reddit, I sort of pieced together the fact that she grew up in a very religious Mormon household. They were a very militaristic or highly disciplined household. She was the oldest of 4 daughters, by the way, all of whom have become parental influencers, which is very weird. But that's kind of it. And then it's smash cut to her YouTube channel, which is all about parenting. And you can imagine, based on what I shared about my view of the parenting industry, I can't stand the fact that her YouTube videos, at least to me, reek of a narcissistic arrogance. It's all about Ruby all the time, and she's using her YouTube channel to essentially brag about how wonderful she is as a mother and how comfortable she is rolling out these super intense, I think, heinous punishments for her kids, right? So not feeding her 6-year-old lunch when they go to school, kicking her son out of his bedroom for 7 months, I think removing her daughter's cell phone indefinitely, like these really intense punishments, and she's bragging about it, right? If you look at her, she meets the diagnostic criteria for narcissism, in my opinion. Now, I can't diagnose from afar, but based on what we have seen through the media, somebody like her would click off all of the diagnostic boxes, right? It's pervasive. It seems like it's impacted multiple areas of her life, her relationship with her husband, her relationship with her kids, right? It's her approach to work. She is exceptionally arrogant. She has delusions of grandeur. She lacks empathy and compassion. She compares herself to others as a way of understanding who she is. All those things line up to narcissism. What I think is important about that is narcissism is built off of insecurity. It's a protective strategy. I don't feel good about myself. I don't have a lot of personal agency. I don't really know who I am. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to act like I am better than everybody else in the world. But below that, there's no sense of self. And to me, that's the dynamic with Ruby. I wonder if, and now I am purely guessing, I wonder if because of her childhood, Ruby had no sense of self. I wonder if because of her religious upbringing, the only direction she received was from the church. I wonder if the way that she found success in life was aligning with her faith, a faith that can be very, very, very harsh. And I wonder if she over-aligned with that. The way that I am successful, the way that I am good is if I minimize who I am and I just give myself, if I just submit to God, my faith, and to the authorities around me. And I wonder if she took that sort of mindset and placed it on parenting. So here you have this mom that is protecting herself from her own insecurity by espousing her views confidently, but underneath that shell is really unmoored. And I wonder if that dynamic put her at risk for a ruthless person in Jodi. Okay, let's talk about Jodi. Again, there is very little data behind Jodi. But what I can tell you is everything I have read about her feels sick to me. It's funny. If I think about what gets someone to become a therapist or a psychologist or a mental health professional in general, I think sometimes the incentives are really good. I want to give back. I want to help people. I think a lot of times it's also I want to learn about people. I think the mind is interesting, right? I want to investigate this thing. And then sometimes it's I want to help myself. I've got a really crappy background, and I want to learn more about me so it's more curative for myself. It's a selfish endeavor. And even worse than that, sometimes it's I want to have power. Being a psychologist or a mental health professional does put you in a position of power. People are coming to you saying, "Hey, I don't know how to handle this part of my life. I need your help." And I think for some people that trips a button, it hits a button which is very self-fulfilling. And for me, when I look at Jodi, that's what I see. What stands out to me is that there is a history of Jodi having interpersonal friction with her clients and the people in her life, right? So on Reddit, I can't quite get a read on how many divorces she has. I know she's had at least one divorce. On Reddit, they're saying she's had 5 divorces. Again, I can't get a read on it, but what I can tell you is she's had interpersonal distress. I also know that she took care of her niece, and her niece ran away saying that Jodi was abusive. The niece continues to say that Jodi was ruthless and abusive. I know that she had her license put on hold for breaking confidentiality of one of her patients, trying to undermine his career. Right? There's this sort of background of her being in a position of power or control, people aligning with her, and then her hurting those people. And it feels to me like this is done intentionally. I also get, and now I am again guessing here, there feels like there's a part of her which is very critical of men. I've read a lot online about her lashing out at men, in particular regarding porn addiction, the presumption that all men are cheaters, all men have porn addiction, all men are using their wives, men aren't doing enough, right? This idea that men need to be minimized and controlled, which lines up with her approach to both her past client that she tried to undermine his career and also her approach to Ruby Franke's husband, Kevin, right? If you look at the dynamic, the way that Jodi moved into Ruby's life, right? She was originally hired to be a therapist for Ruby's son. And then Ruby hired her, Jodi, to be a mentor to Ruby, right? So she went in one capacity and then shifted out of that capacity to something else, which I would argue right off the start is unethical. She moves into this next role and begins to take up more and more space in Ruby's life, just like, by the way, the standard abuser does, right? Enters and starts to isolate. And the first person that I think Jodi isolates Ruby from is from her husband. So again, if you think about my conceptualization of Ruby, you have this kind of unmoored person that comes across really confident but is not, someone that is looking for an anchor, and you have Jodi walk in saying, I know what to do, get rid of that asshole. And so she minimizes her husband, removes her husband, and aligns with her. So much so, by the way, every video I look at, part of me wonders if Jodi was a lesbian. Like there's such a close connection between the two of them. It feels to me like there is some desire to hold and control Ruby. So if I were to conceptualize Jodi, and again, I can't diagnose someone from afar, but somebody like her lines up more with an antisocial personality disorder profile. I wonder if when she was younger as a kid, if she was abused by men, or I wonder if one of her earlier husbands, some man hurt her by way of pornography, because she ended up having this kind of what I would describe as obsession with pornography, sex, right? She was a sex therapist, but her strategy, her approach, there's like tons of data online about her hurting the men in relationships, the men that are seeking support from her. So it feels like she's using her expertise to become powerful and get back what was taken from her earlier in her life. I wish I knew what that was, but my assumption is something horrific happened to her, and the rest of her life became about getting power and control over other people. So fast forward to Jodi and Ruby getting together. I think they made a good team because Jodi was the anchor and Ruby was trying to please. Ruby had the voice, Ruby had the connections, and Jodi had the philosophy. And they were both sort of moving the same direction. I do think with different intent. Let me pause here and say, one of the things I thought was interesting when looking at all of Ruby Franke's YouTube videos is while she is ruthless and arrogant and self-aggrandizing, I do think she thought she was doing what was best for her kids. There's a lot of the camera panning over to them and her saying, we're going to do this right, and it's the kids smiling and aligned with her. I think in her distorted, sick world, I think she thought she had good relationships and a good connection with her children. I don't feel that way about Jodi. But I think that Jodi was such a strong figure that Ruby aligned with her. You know, one of the things that happens in the world of media is if you want to be heard, you have to really niche down. You have to have your approach, your style. And I think when they created their company Connections, and Ruby was one of the mental health fitness counselors or whatever the hell they called it, right? I think that they had to have their strong philosophy of parenting. And I think in an effort to niche down, they got more and more extreme. Or Ruby allowed herself to get more and more extreme, and I think Jodi pushed her that direction because for Jodi, it wasn't about maximizing the well-being of the kids, but it was about being in control of the kids and being in control of Ruby. I think that there's a sick part of Jodi that liked the fact that she could control this well-known figure in the media. I arrived there. I'm trying to think of like, well, David, what data are you looking at that makes you put Ruby in the narcissist, insecure category, but put Jodi in the antisocial, vicious category? And I think the difference for me is the way they approached the trial. In the trial, Ruby goes, I was misled, I'm sorry, and she seems very remorseful. My sense is if you look at the trial and you see Jodi is still operating from a position of, you guys are all wrong and you're all assholes and I know what's right. There is a reluctance to give up the power. There's a reluctance to show emotion. There was zero connection to anything that's going on around her. And that total lack of empathy, total lack of compassion, almost, again, what feels to me like comfort with the distress of others is what lands me in this antisocial bucket. If you've heard the video where the cops get, or the neighbor calls the cops when one of Ruby's kids escapes from Jodi's house, and he's on the phone crying because he can see how horrific this child looks. And what strikes me is they both knew that was going on, but when Ruby was there, I think Jodi was saying, this is good, this is healthy, this is how you cure this kid. But I know that Ruby then left, and now so I sort of look at it and go like, okay, well maybe she influenced in that way. But when Ruby leaves, it's just Jodi there looking at this child who was malnourished and has been abused, and she's going, good. And that, I think that's the dynamic. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, please hit the like button. It's important for the YouTube algorithm. And if you want, let me know in the comments. I've been thinking about doing another video about the parenting strategy, or the sort of philosophy with some of these wilderness camps, especially in the Mormon faith, where it seems like they are abusing kids to the point of submission in an effort to heal them, which I'm interested in talking about. So if you want me to do that video, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.